Well, let's try and summarize what's going on here. So nobody disputes that the Clean Air Act is a good thing. It's massively reduced air pollutants in America. We've seen 70% reduction in pollution across the United States. We have the very clean air compared to the rest of the world. And associated with that authority is the EPA's ability to continue to reassess air quality standards, which then cause states to have to implement programs that determine whether or not certain projects are permitted. And what you really find interesting about this is the projects that we're talking about are really only 16% of the actual emissions. That's been brought up multiple times throughout this hearing. And those are stationary emitters, things like manufacturers, power plants, things that produce all of the stuff that we need. And any reasonable person can look at this and say, there's a logical conclusion to a point where we reach increasing marginal costs and decreasing marginal benefits. You might argue that we're about at that point, especially if you compare, say, our standards to our European friends who are often hailed as, the environmentalist heroes. And so now the EPA wants to reduce the standard from 12 to 9 particulates per million or per cubic meter. So now we have to assess what the costs of that are going to be. And the environmentalists say there's not going to be any costs. There's never any costs, right? One more regulation, just one more, just 3 more, just 10 more, because the last one was good, so 10 more must be better. That's always the logic. But it can't possibly be true. There's always a marginal benefit decrease, which is, I think, what we're seeing, this diminishing returns, especially when you're talking about harming 16% of the actual pollutants and not even talking about 40-something%, which is wildfires. I find it interesting that we look at the map of which counties in America are out of compliance, and California is bright red. Why is that? Likely wildfires, a lot of agriculture in that part of California. And so that means that they cannot as easily permit new power production facilities. What state in America is having the biggest problems with power production and the highest prices, highest increases in electricity prices? California. Maybe because they're having a hard time actually building things. And so those costs just aren't taken into account. And that's a huge, huge problem. We went over before some of the permits that would have been revoked recently if this standard had been in place. And these permits are for things like steel manufacturers, power production plants, aluminum manufacturing, EV battery manufacturing, cement manufacturing. Last I checked, all of these things are essential to a green energy revolution. You want to mine more copper? Well, it's going to have some emissions to it. But you also need a lot of copper and a lot of steel if you want to build hundreds of miles worth of transmission lines to get your green energy to your urban centers. Nobody's thinking about that at the EPA, and that's a real problem. And apparently they don't want EV batteries made either. They want them made in China, but God forbid we actually do some of that processing here under our better standards and have a better global benefit